feeling had long since abandoned Detective Cole Archer's fingers, and his toes were a distant, forgotten memory. For 3 days, his world had been reduced to three things: the gnawing bite of the wind, the rough friction of hemp rope against his raw wrists, and the suffocating silence of the Montana wilderness. The sky over Blacktail Ridge was a bruised, heavy purple, promising more snow. He'd been left to die, tied to a towering pine like some grim, frozen sacrifice. His detective's mind, foggy with fever, tried to retrace the steps. The anonymous tip about the trafficking ring, the trail leading deep into a cellular dead zone. He'd told no one he was going, a breach of protocol born from the chilling realization that the corruption he was hunting had infected his own department. Then a sharp, blinding blow from behind, the weight of a heavy boot on his back, and his sidearm being ripped from its holster. After that, only the cold. In the delirium, as his body began to surrender, his mind clung to a single stubborn memory: the warmth of a jet-black German shepherd sleeping by his boots. Shadow, his K9 partner, lost during a raid over a year ago. They'd all said he was dead, lost to the chaos and the gunfire. Cole had never believed them. He had spent a year listening for pawprints in the snow. Now, as his eyes fluttered shut, he thought he heard them again. A soft crunch, a pause, then another. Just my mind playing tricks, he thought, letting the darkness pull him under. 300 miles south, where the snow was turning to a gray slush on city streets, Julia Evans stirred her coffee with a quiet rage that only grief could build. She wasn't a cop, but she had a cop's blood in her veins. Her cousin, 17-year-old Clara, had vanished 4 weeks ago. The police had dismissed it as a teenage runaway, but Julia knew better. Her obsessive late-night research had unearthed a single fragile thread. Detective Cole Archer, one of the few officers in the region with a reputation for being unbreakable, had been looking into a string of similar disappearances. Then he too had vanished off-grid. It wasn't a coincidence. Julia didn't wait for permission or for a police force she no longer trusted. She packed her camera, her meticulously organized notes on Clara's case, and the Glock her retired FBI father had given her the day after Clara disappeared. She was driving north, toward the unforgiving white expanse of Blacktail Ridge. She was no longer just chasing a story. She was hunting for a ghost, determined to find out why he had disappeared, and praying it would lead her to Clara. The sound was real. It wasn't a phantom conjured by a dying mind, but a tangible presence. A wet, warm nudge against his frozen cheek brought Detective Cole Archer back from the edge of darkness. He forced his leaden eyelids to open, his vision swimming. Through a blur of snow and pain, a familiar silhouette resolved itself. The intelligent, amber eyes. The noble head, tilted with a look of profound concern. It couldn't be. "Shadow?" he rasped, his voice a broken thing, barely more than air and ice. A low, mournful whine answered him, a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat. It was her. She pressed her head against his shoulder, and in that single simple gesture, a year of grief and loss began to melt away. Behind her, a younger, leaner version of herself stood cautiously, ears perked, a pup born of survival and silence. This was Scout. As Shadow licked the frozen tears from Cole's face, the pup took a tentative step forward, sniffing the strange, broken man his mother so clearly knew, before giving his hand a single, hesitant lick of acceptance. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through Cole. He wasn't going to die here. With renewed will, he watched as the two dogs began their impossible work. There was no frantic tearing. It was a slow, methodical assault. Shadow, with the wisdom of experience, found a frayed section of the hemp rope and began to gnaw, her powerful jaws working with grim determination. Scout, mimicking his mother, worried at another section of the knot. Hours bled into one another. The bruised sky deepened to black, but Cole was no longer alone. He felt the tension in the rope loosen, then give way entirely. He slumped forward, free from the tree but still a prisoner of the cold, collapsing into the snow. Shadow and Scout immediately flanked him, pressing their warm, furred bodies against his, sharing their life force until the dawn broke. By morning, the dogs led him to a shallow, ice-crusted stream. With a hunter's grace, Shadow punched a paw through the thin ice, snatched a wriggling fish from the frigid water, and dropped it at Cole's feet. It was an offering, a gift of life. With numb, clumsy fingers, Cole managed to spark his flint striker, coaxing a small, precious flame to life. As he cooked the fish, its smell filling the air, he knew he wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a man with a debt to repay. While Cole Archer was fighting his way back to life, Julia Evans was walking into the lion's den. The small town of Alder Creek, the last outpost before the Blacktail Wilderness, felt wary and closed off. She found her way to a rustic cabin where smoke curled from a stone chimney, the home of Arthur Vance. He was a man carved from the wilderness itself, with a grizzled beard and eyes that held the quiet, weary wisdom of the mountains. She laid out the photos of Cole and Clara on his rough-hewn wooden table. "I'm looking for them," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My cousin vanished a month ago. Detective Archer was investigating cases like hers, and now he's gone too." Arthur studied the photos, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. "Lots of people get lost in these woods," he finally rumbled, his voice low. "They didn't get lost," Julia insisted, leaning forward. "They were taken, I know it." Something in her conviction, in the raw grief that sharpened her features, broke through his stoic reserve. His gaze softened with a flicker of old pain. "3 nights back," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on the tree line outside his window. "I saw a dark SUV up on the old logging road. Saw 2 men shove another man into the trees. He wore a badge on his hip." Arthur finally met her eyes. "They saw me watching, told me to keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me. I'm an old man. I know what's good for me." "Please," Julia whispered. "She's my family. She's all I have left." Arthur let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man making a decision he knew he might regret. He stood up and pulled a heavy wool coat from a peg by the door. "Get your gear," he said. "If you're going up there, you're not going alone." After eating, Cole felt a semblance of strength return. He followed Shadow, who now moved with a renewed sense of purpose, with Scout bounding eagerly ahead. They followed the stream bed, where the snow was thinner, packed down not by animals but by tire tracks, old and faint. Scout suddenly darted toward a thicket, sniffing frantically before he began to dig. Cole limped over. Beneath a half-frozen canvas tarp was a satchel. His fingers, still stiff, worked the buckle open. Inside, sealed in plastic, were dozens of fake IDs, passports, driver's licenses. He recognized a face from a 6-month-old missing persons report out of Bozeman. This wasn't just a drop point. It was a factory for stolen lives. His mission was no longer just survival. It was justice. At that same time, miles away on a different ridge, Arthur Vance stopped, pointing to a clearing below. "This is as far as I can track them," he said. Julia scanned the area, her heart pounding, and then she saw it, a flash of pale blue fabric snagged on the thorns of a bramble bush. She scrambled down the slope, ignoring Arthur's call to be careful. Her gloved fingers closed around the material. It was a jacket, small and torn. Inside the collar, stitched in faded pink thread, were the letters she dreaded and longed to see. C.E. Clara had been here. She clutched the jacket to her chest, a wave of cold horror and fierce, terrible hope washing over her. She was close. Of course. Here is the climax of your story, a 600-word section based on the outline for Part 3. It continues directly from the discoveries made at the end of Part 2, weaving the 2 storylines together into a tense and dramatic conclusion. The discovery of the satchel lit a fire in Cole Archer's soul, burning away the last vestiges of the victim he had been. He was a detective again. With Shadow at point and Scout scouting the perimeter, they moved with a hunter's purpose toward the squat, rusting skeleton of the warehouse that loomed against the snow. Old tire tracks, nearly erased by the weather, confirmed this was the place. As they circled the derelict structure, Scout froze, his nose pressed to the foundation. A low whine rumbled in his chest. Tucked behind a loose piece of corrugated metal was a narrow crawl space hidden in shadow. "Good boy," Cole whispered, his hand resting briefly on the pup's head. He knew what he had to do. Crawling through the tight, damp passage, he emerged into the cold, stale air of the warehouse. It smelled of rust and despair. Guided by Scout, he moved silently through the labyrinth of crates toward a stairwell. From the darkness below, he heard it, a soft, trembling cough. He descended into the gloom. At the end of a short corridor was a heavy steel door. He pushed it open. Two girls huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with terror. The younger one, pale and gaunt, had her arms wrapped around the other. It was Clara. "It's okay," Cole said, his voice soft but firm, cutting the zip ties on their wrists. "I'm a cop. I'm getting you out of here." At that exact moment, high on the ridge above, Julia Evans clutched Clara's jacket to her chest, a wave of frigid certainty washing over her. She took a step back toward Arthur, but it was too late. The snap of a twig behind her was her only warning. Two hard-faced men emerged from the trees, their expressions devoid of anything but cold intent. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Branches whipped at her face as she scrambled down a steep wooded ravine, panic burning in her lungs. She could hear their heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth behind her, gaining on her. She tripped on a hidden root, sprawling into a deep snowbank. As a hand reached for her shoulder, a blur of black fur erupted from the trees. Shadow moved like a silent, lethal ghost. There was no bark, only a deep, guttural growl as she slammed into the first man, knocking him off his feet. She spun instantly, placing herself between Julia and the second man, her teeth bared in a silent, deadly promise. The man froze, his eyes wide with shock, giving Julia the precious seconds she needed to scramble away. Shadow didn't follow the men. She trotted to Julia's side and nudged her forward, guiding her toward the warehouse below. As they broke through the tree line, Julia saw them. A haggard, ghost-like man, who could only be Detective Archer, supporting two trembling girls, and one of them, it was Clara. "Clara!" Julia gasped, tears streaming down her face. Cole saw the woman, protected by his dog, and understood. Their separate hunts had led them to the same desperate place. There was no time for explanations. He pulled the battered emergency beacon from his belt pouch and pressed the button. A single, silent blue light began to pulse, a tiny heartbeat of hope against the vast, indifferent wilderness. "Now we wait," he said, his voice raspy with exhaustion. The wait was agonizingly short. Within minutes, the sound of engines broke the silence. Three black SUVs crested the hill, their sides bearing the insignia of the Montana Department of Criminal Investigations. Captain Marcus Thorne was the first one out. "You look like hell, Archer," he said, his eyes taking in the scene. "Feels about right," Cole muttered. As Thorne's team moved to secure the girls, Shadow suddenly bolted, darting back inside the warehouse. A startled shout echoed from within. Thorne drew his weapon and ran in after her. They found a third man, who had been hiding in ambush, pinned to the floor by Shadow, with Scout arriving a second later to block his escape. The man's knife lay uselessly on the concrete nearby. Justice delivered by two loyal souls had finally come to Blacktail Ridge. In the chaotic aftermath, as the suspects were led away in cuffs and paramedics wrapped the rescued girls in thermal blankets, Julia Evans sat on the tailgate of a patrol truck. Beside her, wrapped in the silver gleam of an emergency blanket, her cousin Clara was finally blessedly asleep. Julia watched the steady rise and fall of her chest, a sight she had feared she would never see again. The raw, desperate energy that had fueled her for weeks was now replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and an even deeper sense of gratitude. She pulled out her small digital voice recorder. The professional habit was automatic, but her words were anything but. "This is Julia Evans," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "Today I watched a detective fight his way back from the dead. I watched two dogs, presumed lost to the wild, become guardians, and I found my cousin alive." She paused, looking past the flashing lights to the dark, silent pines. This story was never just about one girl. It's about all the ones still missing, the ones no one is looking for. Their names deserve to be known. She clicked the recorder off, clutching it like a promise. Days later, in a quiet room at the county hospital, Cole Archer looked out at the snow-dusted mountains, his ribs taped and his wrists bandaged. Shadow lay curled by his chair, her duty done, her head resting on her paws but her ears twitching at his every movement. Scout, ever the puppy, was happily gnawing on a knotted rope toy at his feet. The door opened to reveal Captain Marcus Thorne, his usual tactical vest replaced by a simple blazer. "The feds are taking over," Thorne said, setting a folder on the table. "Looks like you and your partners blew the lid off their entire northern operation." He then knelt, pulling a small, polished silver shield from his pocket. "The department held a vote, unanimous." He clipped the tag onto Shadow's collar. It was engraved, Honorary K9 Shadow. The shepherd lifted her head, acknowledged the captain with a single lick to his hand, then rested her chin back on her paws, her gaze fixed on Cole. "As for this one," Thorne said, nodding at the pup, "the K9 Academy is making an exception. Says he's already passed the toughest test there is." Cole simply nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face as he watched his two miracles, his family, finally home. 3 weeks later, the town of Alder Creek gathered in the square, the flickering candlelight of a memorial vigil pushing back against the encroaching dusk. Cole Archer, no longer looking like a ghost but a man remade, stood before them. He didn't speak of the criminals or the violence, but of loyalty. "Some souls don't speak our language," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Shadow and Scout sitting faithfully by the platform. "But they understand the human heart better than we do. They reminded me that loyalty doesn't die. It just waits." Miles away, Julia Evans' article, Shadows in the Pines, was syndicated across the country. Her phone rang endlessly with offers, but she was already pinning new photos to her corkboard, new faces of the lost and forgotten, waiting for a voice. The true miracle wasn't just the rescue, it was the quiet return of hope to a fractured world. On a sunlit trail deep in the mountains, Cole walked with his two companions, not hunting for suspects, but simply enjoying the peace. They were more than dogs, they were messengers. They were a living, breathing reminder that the best of us, whether man or animal, never truly gives up on those we love. The story of Detective Archer and his loyal dogs, Shadow and Scout, resonates with a truth we feel deep in our bones. True loyalty knows no bounds of time, distance, or even death. In a world that often feels fast-paced and fleeting, this narrative reminds us of the profound, anchoring power of unwavering devotion. We see it in the story, but more importantly, we recognize it from our own lives. In the steadfast love of a spouse through decades of shared history, in the unwavering support of a lifelong friend, and in the simple, unconditional affection of a beloved pet waiting for us at the door. The story's first lesson is a gentle encouragement to cherish these sacred bonds, for they are the true treasures of a life well lived. Beyond this, the narrative speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, especially when fueled by purpose. Cole, at his lowest point, found a reason to live not just for himself, but for the dogs who saved him and the justice he still had to deliver. Julia, faced with devastating loss, transformed her grief into a mission, becoming a voice for the voiceless. This teaches us a powerful lesson applicable at any age. Our experiences, even the most painful ones, forge a strength within us. It is never too late to find a new purpose, to stand up for what is right, or to use our wisdom to make a difference for our family or community. Perhaps the most beautiful application for our daily lives is the call to recognize the quiet miracles around us. Hope didn't arrive for Cole in a grand display, but as a warm nudge from a wet nose in the snow. Grace often appears not in thunder, but in the simple, steady presence of love. The story urges us to look for it, in a grandchild's laugh, in the kindness of a neighbor, or in the quiet companionship of an animal. It reminds us that the most meaningful things in life are rarely the loudest, but are instead found in the constant, faithful heartbeat of love and loyalty.